sometimes the most loving thing I can do, Shannon, is to release somebody to the labor pool. I'm very clear on that. So the most loving thing I can do, and I've done this actually when I was in the Balkans. My warrant officer was not up to par, and I had to fire him. You can see them as full human beings, and you can still say, and you don't have to be angry or arrogant or passive-aggressive by saying, look, these are the expectations. You're not meeting them here, here, and here.
From the Grit Institute, this is the Grit Factor podcast. And I'm Shannon Huffman Polson, former Apache helicopter pilot, speaker, and author of The Grit Factor, Courage, Resilience, and Leadership in the most male-dominated organization in the world. I'm also the founder of the Grit Institute, where I help purpose-driven leaders like you build grit and resilience and connect with purpose so that you can navigate transitions, overcome challenges, and lead with impact in your work for a better world.
St. Augustine said that humility is the foundation of all of the other virtues. Hence, in the soul in which this virtue does not exist, there cannot be any other virtue except in mere appearance. Humility. It's a word that gets tossed around, often misunderstood as meekness, passivity, or a lack of confidence. In reality, humility, true humility, is one of the most courageous, powerful, and transformative traits a leader can possess. It's not about thinking less of yourself, it's about thinking of yourself less, making space for others, and creating an environment where trust and learning can flourish. In a world that prizes speed, ego, and certainty, especially today, humility can feel like a lost art, one many leaders dismiss as a soft skill. But in reality, humility is a hard-won strength. It's what allows leaders to admit when they don't have all the answers, to listen deeply, and to build teams that are more resilient, innovative, and connected. My guest today on the Grit Factor is Dr. Urs Koenig, and he's on a mission to reestablish humility as a leadership superpower. As a former UN peacekeeper, a competitive ultra-endurance athlete, an executive coach, and speaker who's worked with leaders across industries and continents, Urs has seen firsthand that the leaders who endure, inspire, and achieve extraordinary results are the ones who lead with humility. His new book, Radical Humility, is not only a call to action but a roadmap, showing us how to shift from ego-driven leadership to people-powered success. I've known Urs for years, and I can tell you that he embodies what he teaches. His life, his work, and his wisdom are proof that humility is not a weakness, but the foundation of all the other virtues and the source of lasting impact. Let's take off. Well, we'll get going. Urs, it's wonderful to have you on the Grit Factor. It's always a pleasure to talk to you.
Shannon, we share so many passions and challenges, including, parenting teenage boys, right? So I love seeing you. I love being here. Thanks for having me.
It's never a dull moment. I will say that if anything in the world will bring you into the state of radical humility, it is indeed parenting teenage boys.
So true.
That's good. Well, congratulations on the award that Radical Humility just won through Axiom Business Awards. It's a gold medalist in their business category, and for a very good reason. I hope that every listener is going to get their hands on a copy, and not just get their hands on it, but also read it, because it's really covers such an incredible, doesn't just cover an amazing array of topics, but it also, I think you address it so thoughtfully with your own experiences, which are so wide-ranging and so intense that you just really have quite a lot to offer all of us in terms of how it is that we look at leadership in both our work and in our lives. So thank you for putting that work into the world.
Thank you, Shannon. Appreciate it.
Well, your career is wide-ranging. Most recently as a UN peacekeeper, maybe most recently, in fact, as an author, but as a UN peacekeeper, you've been a NATO commander, you've been an ultra-endurance athlete in multiple sports, really, a professor and a coach.
What do all of these experiences for you have in common such that you were able to bring them together in radical humility?
Well, I think, I'm a bit of an intensity junkie, to be honest. So I sort of thrive on intense experiences. And so a lot of my background, is, shall we say, sometimes not for the faint of heart. And so I think that's one of the common denominators across all the experiences. But, in terms of the leadership, I mean, it all comes down to, and I actually really openly talk about this. You want to be a leader, you got to love people. You actually have to love people. It doesn't matter if you're a leader in the military, in ultra endurance competition, in academia, in the business. You don't have to be an extrovert, by the way. It's not the same thing. But you actually fundamentally have to like engaging with people. And I do put forward, you actually have to love people if you want to be a good leader. And it spans across all of these areas that I have experience in.
I'm really happy that we are starting to now in the business community and in the leadership space use that word love, because it's one I think we might have avoided a little bit for a while, but it really is what it is about, isn't it? You really do have to have a heart for it. It's not just the mind or just the goal setting or just the intensity, but it is that love, isn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, we'll talk about that, but I have this notion of being tough on results and tender on people, right? And tender on people means fundamentally taking care of your people and loving them, but also tough on results. So we can actually have it both ways. We can have high standards and really see our people as full human beings and seeing them as the human beings they are, with all their strengths, weaknesses, and opportunities for growth. So absolutely, they go hand in hand.
We are definitely going to come back around to that, because I think that's one of the more important and trickier aspects of the framework that you put forward. But before we do that, I just want to get into one of your intense experiences, because I think people will enjoy coming on the journey. Well, maybe not enjoy, but will appreciate your telling of that journey. And you had a pretty brutal experience in a ride across America one year. I'm not sure that most people even know race across America, really even know what that is. Can you set the stage a little bit for us? Tell us what that was, how it is you got involved in it, and then what the experience was that really became kind of a crucible moment for you.
Absolutely. Yeah. So the race across America is a 3,000-mile nonstop transcontinental bike race that starts in San Diego and finishes in Atlantic City. The clock doesn't stop, so the gun goes off, and you have 12 days to finish. So you must average 250 miles every day and climb well over 170,000 feet. So I had the dream to finish the race across America in 2005. I finished this in a team in 2002. And this is more like a mountaineering expedition. And I know you climbed Denali, so you can relate. It's not just your typical race. There's logistics, there is support crew, there is vehicles, there is a gear. So it's a big exercise. So for 2 years, this was my dream. I put everything I had into finishing this race. Significant funds. I had 10 crew members who gave 3 weeks of their summer up to support me. I trained my sweet behind off, of course. And so put everything I had into finish that race. And then 4 days into the race, I was getting dizzier and dizzier. I couldn't breathe anymore. My breathing literally sounded like a bubble bath. So my crew decides to peel me off the bike. They really had me to peel me off the bike, because in ultra cycling, there's one rule. You do not get off the bike. Even if you go 5 miles an hour, 2 miles an hour, you don't get off. So anyway, they peeled me off. We went to the closest medical facility, and they measured my oxygen saturation. That's the little thing they put on your finger during your annual physical, 42%. So 95 to 100 is normal. So I was suffering from severe pulmonary edema. That's the stuff people die from on Everest. And so I was, it's a long story, but I was airlifted into ICU, into Albuquerque, was in ICU for 3 days, and then more complications on the way back. So I felt devastated. I put all I had into finishing this race. I felt ashamed. I felt embarrassed. I felt worthless. I felt guilt for having dragged my crew along with me. And so I was absolutely devastated. And so to come back to your question, so that was the experience. What did I learn from it? I learned over a long period of time, it took me about a year, to reframe my failure. So instead of being flooded by my strong emotions, like we all, when we fail, especially when we fail publicly, all of us, we feel these emotions, if we're honest. Shame, embarrassment. Think about your last public speaking mistake, right? Doesn't feel so good, right? And not you specifically because you're a professional speaker, but all of us. So I had to do deep introspection, a lot of journaling, talking to a therapist, talking to my crew members, talking to my family. And slowly and over time, I was able to reframe my huge failure, my being flooded by strong emotions, into what I now call my reframe statement, which was or is my DNF, my did not finish, will make me faster next year. So instead of being flooded by my strong emotions, I went and, okay, let's actually look at what happened. So I worked with high altitude researchers at the UW here locally and found the cause, which was, by the way, sodium overload, which led to water retention, not so much the altitude, that led to my pulmonary edema. And so I went through a long process of working through my strong emotions with the people I felt close to, while at the same time doing my after action review in the military, look back, what went well, what didn't go well. So that's the analytical part. And then was able to come up through reframing with a statement that my DNF will make me faster next year. And indeed, next year, I can say this with all the humility I can muster, I did have my best ultra cycling season, multiple course records and wins. But importantly, this would have never happened. I wouldn't have been able to have this amazing season the next year if I wouldn't have failed miserably the year before during RAM, if I wouldn't have been able to implement those learnings. So this was really a foundational experience for me and really crystallized the importance of moving from being flooded by strong emotions through reframing so we can learn from our experiences. And now, I talk about this also sometimes in my keynote and help teams do exactly that. So how can we shift from being embarrassed, worse, sweep it under the carpet, like let's actually hide it. That's the worst outcome, to learning from what we messed up. So
Yes. Well, thank you for sharing that. It's a intense story that you share in your book as well, and in some more detail for the readers that are still to come, and really helpful to hear both this idea of reframing and also the idea of how it is that you do the work to move through failure, right? Which I don't think we talk about enough, because all of us fail. Every leader knows that failure is part of the path to success, right? But sometimes it can be hard to get back up after something like that.
Absolutely. No, it absolutely can be. And I think I have a quote in there. Strength does not come from winning easy battles, but from losing hard-fought ones, right? And it's a nice quote, right? And it's fun to chat about this right now. But let's be real. And you pointed out, it's real work. I mean, I was borderline depressed during a good part of that phase because, the race went, my identity went. I was so tied up with my goal that I was getting too close to the outcome. And so that's, happens often to leaders as well, right? So we're getting so close to our position. So when the position goes, our ego goes.
Absolutely. Yes. And then you still, in many cases, you have to, if it's a failure where the position doesn't go, you have to continue to lead, right? In the midst of that. And you may be feeling things, you may be going through all of that incredibly intense work, but you still have to get out there and do the work at the same time, right? In
Absolutely.
the face of that.
Yeah,
it's where the learning happens for sure. So what do you see both from this world of this ultra endurance athletics as well as in the world of leadership? And I know you worked on that in the UN as well as in the corporate sphere, as well as a coach. Where are the parallels in the leadership beyond this idea of the reframe, which is such a powerful one? But I know there's many more.
Yeah, there's a lot more, but people often ask me this, and I actually come back to this notion, which now fortunately is much more often talked about, of, we call it super compensation in sports, right? So we stress our bodies, we train, and then we need to recover to go into super compensation in order to get better. So if we don't train, we don't get better. Also, if we don't recover, we don't get better. And so I think about this both for the leaders I speak to and also for myself. that I need to really manage my own energy very, very carefully. So as a leader, I want to be thoughtful about when do I need downtime for myself? When do I need to, subtract myself from the team and do whatever self-care I need to do? And again, fortunately now, leaders are much more open. I think the days where leaders brag about how they only sleep 4 hours a night are pretty much over. I think a lot of the more successful leaders today are very open about what they need to recharge. And so this is where I see a lot of the things we can learn from ultra endurance competition for leadership, which is not only managing your time, but managing your energy and being thoughtful about, as a leader too, when are you best? Daniel Pink wrote the great book, When, which is all about the timing of things. So on a very basic level, understanding for yourself, what time of day am I best for deep analytical work? When am I best to have meetings? And when do I actually need a little 10-minute walk outside or a little meditation or whatever? So really understanding my own rhythms so I can manage my energy better, much like every good athlete does. I mean, athletes are master nappers. We both admire Jessie Diggins, who's one of the legendary cross-country skiing racers of the U.S., Olympic gold medal winner. And World Cup winner overall this year, by the way, she naps an hour and a half to 2 hours every day.
Is that right? I didn't know
absolutely.
that.
Yeah, absolutely. She's a master napper. So there's a lot we can learn from sports, from ultra endurance competition, from leadership in terms of managing our own energy.
Or when people ask, and I'll ask you the same question for your book, although you might still be thinking about it in this way, but what do I wish that I would have been included in the Grit Factor? And the Grit Factor came out right in the middle of COVID. And I remember thinking, I talk about this, but I should have written about this too, is that grit is critical. You clearly have it in spades, but it is not a sustainable operating mode, right? It's something you need to be able to build and you need to be able to draw from and employ, but you can't work like that all the time. And neither a leader for themselves nor for their teams can they expect that. And that's a really important piece, that rest piece that I wish that I had included, and certainly do in my talks now, but left out of the book. So I'm glad that you've added to the literature there.
but Shannon, I love what you just mentioned. Like, that's actually a quick aside on our books.
Yeah.
So you wouldn't be humble if you say, I changed nothing about my book, right?
Yeah.
And actually that's the same for me. I mean, thank you for all the kind words. I think actually if I had to write the book again, I would include less. I actually tried to pack too much into the book, frankly. And so I would maybe take a few things out. And one thing I would add, and maybe we talk about that, is I touch on it and I write about it some in the book, but I would go into more depth why we seem to promote and elect the wrong leaders.
Interesting.
And if radical humility is what I really believe it is, the ticket to winning in leadership, how come if we look around on the world stage right now, we have everything but humble leaders? And so I would go into more depth there now, a year after launching it.
That's so interesting. Yes. Why don't we go ahead and go there? We were going to get there eventually anyway. So you've written this book on radical humility. I think you've had very well-deserved accolades from a number of people that I have a ton of respect for, and I loved it myself. This world that we're living in and the people that we do see in these leadership roles that Walter Isaacson writes about and that we read about and that we see taking the political stages as well, most of them are not humble leaders. And at least in this day and age, I think that's changed over time at times, although I would say generally speaking, we have a track record of not particularly humble leaders. And many people would see some disparity between either the confidence or the egoism that's sort of the extreme that we're seeing right now and humble leadership. Can you speak a little bit to that disparity, why that makes radical humility even more important, and if it has a chance in this world?
Well, I'm out there to battle it. So, and so I do think it has a chance. But that's I mean, you really said well there. So a couple of thoughts I have initially. The first, I'm always asked, what about confidence and humility? And at that one, I actually address directly in the book. So I actually believe that they go hand in hand. Only if I'm fundamentally confident in myself, have a strong sense of self, can I then, for example, humbly ask you, Shannon, as my friend, colleague, and potentially teammate, for feedback. So, Shannon, what can I do better as a speaker? What can I do better as an author? But I need to be fundamentally confident in myself to be able to actually ask that question. We all know people who mask their insecurities with arrogance and never actually ask for any feedback. And so I really believe that confidence and humility go hand in hand, not overconfidence, but confidence. So that's the first thing I would say. Look, and then the second piece is that humble leaders often fly under the radar. And so, that we read and see all or a lot of the non-humble leaders because they do like the spotlight more than the humble leaders. And so, there's a bit of a self-selection bias there in terms of who we actually talk about and who we see on stage. And then, I'm literally working on a piece right now. Why do we elect and promote the wrong leaders? So there's a body of research about the strongman theory. And so, which I'm fascinated by, and this applies more on the political end. Believe it or not, since the end of the Cold War, a third of the countries around the globe have been continuously run by elected autocrats, strong men, 1/3, okay? And so these strong men get elected, and then, Hungary, Poland, although Poland went the other way again. We had to have some countries in Central and Latin America where that applies. So they get elected, and then they sort of, we probably shouldn't talk about politics in America here, but I'm going to go there anyway, how we can argue that the current US president is sort of dismantling checks and balances to some extent and is, certainly, shall we say, stretching the executive power of his office. And so there is
fair, no matter who you are. I can't imagine anybody would argue with that.
Right. So, so there is, and so why does this happen? Why do we, when people feel there's culture war going on, lots of insecurity, lots of economic uncertainty, we all gravitate because of how we evolutionarily are wired to strong men. For a lot of our evolutionary history, we looked for leaders who were male, strong, brave, tough, and we're still stuck in that, in that brain. And yet, in today's world, I would argue, with all the complexity that's going on, those simplistic leadership characteristics don't really cut it anymore. I could go on and on. I mean, the other thing is we overemphasize overconfidence versus competence. Okay, there's actually research showing that in a group of people, we gravitate towards electing or choosing the confident, even slightly narcissistic leader over everybody else. Why? They're great at, sounding like they know what they're saying, and they're great at managing their own position in the group. A narcissist does that really well, and because they're so good at it, and it's an important part of getting ahead in any organization, sort of managing how you're viewed. So there is this concept of a gravitation towards strongman leaders, which is unfortunately sort of in our evolutionary brain. Our priorities are set around overconfidence. We're drawn towards narcissists. And then, the last piece I would say around this is that we often fall into the action trap. So we see people who are very busy and do a lot of stuff as, that's leadership potential, right? And you could argue that, the large number of executive orders in Trump's first, whatever it is now, 100 days or something, sort of, fall into that category. He does lots of stuff, right? How effective is it really? No matter where you sit on the political spectrum is a different question. So I'm not sure I'm answering your question here. So
I actually think this is really important because this is
a topic that I think we need to tease out a lot more. And you're doing this in your book and in your research now and in what you're about to write as well. But being aware of our tendencies when we feel chaos around us to gravitate towards this kind of person. I just had a conversation with a man named Dave Wharton, who runs something called the Tugboat Institute. And it's a consortium of what he calls evergreen companies. And there are companies that are private, and they're built to last for generations and generations. And oftentimes, and one of the 7 Ps that are the things that he uses to define these evergreen companies is this very careful growth, right? They probably could explode but they don't take outside investment, and they don't explode in growth because they're more careful and considered about how they approach things. They're not going after the kind of the strong man, go big or go home. They want things to last, and they want things to have purpose. And the interesting thing that he notes about a lot of the leaders of these companies is that many of them are introverts, which is just very interesting, right? Because they don't have this need to be out in front and being flashy. You probably haven't even heard of a lot of these companies, but they're on incredibly strong financial footing. They're always private. They're always profitable. They're always people first. They're always purpose focused. And I just thought that was such an interesting observation that most of them are run by introverts.
By the way, I want to know more about this. We could do this offline. That's super interesting. I love that. And this goes way back. Jim Collins first wrote about this, in 2001 in Good to Great, level 5 leadership, right? And so, but that's interesting. So the introverts, and again, there's some self-selection there. If you're an introvert, I would argue it's probably less likely you're going to try to run for presidency of the United States, right? And so, so there is a self-selection there going on that we end up with all these other leaders.
Yeah. No, that's fair. I think there was in the Greenspan autobiography, I think he was quoted as saying that anybody who wants to run for president should not be allowed to run.
That's right. I read that as well. That's good.
That's right. No, it's great. Well, so and this segs naturally into this next idea that you're talking in Radical Humility about transitioning from this heroic to this humble leadership. Yeah. So what inspired you with all of the incredible experiences that you've had and the background that you have and what's going on in the world today? What inspired you to develop this framework? And how do you see it having an impact on the challenges that we're facing in the world, again, both corporate and political, with leadership in general, which I would argue is we're seeing a dearth of right now?
Right. So look, so heroic leadership is, and I'm not the only one, of course, who talks about this, is top-down, command control, centralized. The leader, and often it is a he, sits on top of the org chart, has all the data, all the information, makes all the calls, him or herself. And so, and I challenge that for a variety of reasons. First of all, McChrystal in Team of Teams writes about this. We're facing an inversion of expertise, meaning our people will always know so much more than we ever can about their specific area of expertise, right? So, and now with AI, we're not the smartest anymore. So there's another inversion of expertise. And so and our world, it's almost a cliche now, VUCA world, fast-moving, complex, and all the rest of it, fast-moving. One person cannot have all the answers. If you're the centralized person at the top who needs all the decisions to run through you, you're slowing everything down. You're always a step or two behind. So I challenge the heroic leadership paradigm for 2 main reasons. The first one is the external environment, our political and business environment doesn't do it justice anymore. And then the other piece is our workforce desires a different kind of leader. All the research shows that young, Gen Zs in the workforce, they want purpose, they want meaning, and we can argue that sometimes maybe, for people of my generation, a bit older, like that's almost a bit too much, but they want purpose, they want meaning, they want relationships. Research shows people who have a best friend at work are 7 times less likely to quit, they're more engaged. And so we need to move away from this heroic top-down leadership towards, of course, what I would put forward is radical humility or humble leadership, which is a more relational leadership, where I can still be the captain, I can still steer the ship, but it's engaging the whole team, tapping into everybody's wisdom, and being very clear on what decisions you each individually, I expect you each individually to make on your own versus what decisions still have to go through me. That's actually a little side thing, but I often talk with leaders, and I'm amazed how few leaders have that conversation with their team. How clear have you been with the decisions that you expect your team members to make on their own versus the decisions that they need to bring to you? Yes. Very few people do this explicitly, and it's so helpful. Like, it's freeing your people up to make calls on their own, and it frees you up from the day to day and helps you to focus on higher level, more strategic issues.
Well, that is such an important point. And there are two examples that you brought up in your book that I think are worthy of well, there are more examples than that, but two specific to this particular point. One of them, and I'm appreciating your sweater. You look very Zelensky-like today. So we'll go to the UN.
That's right.
We'll go to the UN. But the Western forces, I remember learning this when I was stationed in Korea. In the Western world, our militaries, at least for the U.S. military, I can speak for that, and you can speak for the UN. We operate by a commander's intent, right? So there's the commander's intent, which is to do X, Y, and Z, which is distinct from the mission and distinct from the rest of the specifics of the operations order, because, as we know, a plan rarely survives first contact. And so the commander's intent allows people to maneuver within the construct simply of that intent. And you talked about that a bit in your book relative to Ukraine and Russia, that Ukraine operates more with this commander's intent, and Russia and the forces that, like Russia, have always been much more centralized. So you can't operate outside that central requirement. The other example that you gave, which I think is the most brilliant, and I absolutely love this, is that one of the Ritz-Carlton. So maybe speak a bit to both of those examples, or whichever one speaks best to you.
Absolutely. So actually, I'm going to do a third one, but
third one's even better.
So D-Day, which is very close, I know, to your heart as well. D-Day was a planning disaster. Within hours of the planes taking off, the airborne troops, and I'm sure you've seen Band of Brothers, and your viewers, if you haven't, watch this outstanding TV series, Band of Brothers. The airborne forces were spread all over Normandy. Virtually no trooper landed in the designated drop zone, but because they all had internalized the commander's intent. And, when I talk about this in my keynote, I call it common goal for the business purpose. And the common goal, the commander's intent, was to secure key terrain, roadways, bridges, villages. So because every single trooper had internalized that commander's intent, they were able to improvise. They started to form teams of 2, 3, 4, 5, and people they've never met, and started to fight to achieve the commander's intent, the end state of the mission. So the plan was a total disaster, but the commander's intent, or common goal, or common purpose in the business world, saved the day. So that's exactly right. In the Swiss Armed Forces, this is a German expression, we call it Auftragstaktik. It's exactly the same thing. It's what is the end goal, the commander's intent. So yeah, I love that.
No, it's really important, and it frees you up as a leader, but it also frees your people up. And I just got off a conversation with a New Zealand Army officer, and she was talking specifically about this need for, in the framework that she uses for leadership, is autonomy, and that autonomy. And I think about that relative to what youth need in today's world too, just to kind of bring in all these different tertiary issues to come back to our teenage boys. But there was a great article in The Atlantic on the resilience gap a couple of Septembers ago. And one of the things that the author pulled out as critical is agency, right? Hope and agency. And if you give your people agency, not only does that make them more able to connect to purpose, more able to deliver what it is that you need to have delivered within the context of that intent, or that, I like your common goal or common purpose, but it also gives them what they need to be excited to be part of your team and to be able to contribute their best selves. Yes?
If you've been asking yourself, what's the point of all of this? Not just in your job, but in your life, you're not alone. Most high achievers I work with aren't lacking drive. They're lacking direction that actually matters. That's why I built Leading with Purpose at the Grit Institute. It's a step-by-step path to reconnect with what drives you, leads you, and sustains you, especially when things get hard.
If you're tired of just checking boxes and you're ready to lead with intention, go to thegritinstitute.com/purpose/ and start leading with purpose today.
Absolutely. People support what they help build. There's no question about it, right? So, no, I think that's really, I mean, commander's intent or common goal, common purpose, whatever we call, like that really gives your people agency. And, and then you also, and then let's be real though, it's not always easy. You as a leader then have to actually step out and you have to let them decide for themselves for how they go from where they are to where they need to be, with as much creativity, with as much innovation, with, yes, as much new technology as possible, but you can't then go and step in and micromanage because you empowered them, so then you need to let them run. And so this is where a lot of leaders need to be really self-aware around their potential tendency to step in when they see something that, they might question or they're not quite sure. Like, you got to just step back and let your people do their stuff and then, do a debrief afterwards.
Yes, that's really important. I want to come back around to that idea of self-awareness because it's really important and sometimes difficult, I think, for leaders, especially when they're so execution-oriented. But before we do that, let's talk a little bit about the framework that you have set up in Radical Humility of the 5 shifts. And maybe give an overview of that framework. And then I want to get into what you mentioned earlier in our conversation, this tough on results and tender on people. So let's talk about the 5 shifts generally, and then let's get into that specific couple of shifts there.
Sure. Because I'm the biggest cynic of them all. We all have 7 mindset, those 3 steps. I have 5 shifts. There you go. Right.
I like it. It's an odd number. It's an odd number. That works well in the Western world.
Exactly. It's an odd number. So I start with the first shift is really self-leadership. And that's where the self-awareness comes in. I call that digging deep. So having the humility to know that I can't and mustn't do it all. And I can't do everything, but I can do almost anything I put my mind and heart into it. So focus, self-awareness. So that's the first one. The second one then goes into team leadership, tough on results, tender on people, which we'll talk about. Leading like a compass, which is all about what we just talked about, basically. So commander's intent, give direction, then empower and delegate. The fourth one is about full transparency, both transparency in terms of the overall goals, the strategy, where we're going with our team, with our platoon, with our department, with our company, and also transparency around where I suck. Like, what can I do better as a leader? So being transparent about that. And then the last one goes, so self, team, and then organizationally, the last one is championing fearless culture, of course, relying heavily on the amazing work by Amy Edmondson, building psychological safety. So these are the 5 shifts.
Great. So let's get into one that I find really tricky sometimes. And you do speak to the nuances in your book about this and how it can be tricky, but it can be really difficult, although it briefs well, to be tough on results and tender on people. And if you have somebody who is maybe not performing or not even fully on board with the commander's intent, let's say, or what their place is or what their role is. Can you talk a little bit about how we can be tough on results and tender on people while we still maintain accountability and an expectation of excellence?
So to be clear, sometimes the most loving thing I can do, Shannon, is to release somebody to the labor pool. Yes. I'm very clear on that. So the most loving thing I can do, and I've done this actually when I was in the Balkans. My warrant officer was not up to par, and I had to fire him. And I mean, I messed up plenty of things in my life. That one I did well. I was very tough on results, and I was tender on people. I was clear with him about the expectations. We did all the right things, performance improvement plans and whatnot, and then he could see for himself why it didn't work out. And so I would still maintain that even if you have underperformers, you can meet them at eye level, you can see them as whole human beings, and you can still say, and you don't have to be angry or arrogant or passive-aggressive by saying, look, these are the expectations. You're not meeting them here, here, and here, and this is the consequence. So, you don't need to be an a-hole. You can actually hold your people accountable in a very human way. So I really feel very strongly that, and moving away from the sort of underperformer, being tender on people gives me actually license to be tough on results. So I have a story in the book. My commander in Kosovo opened a meeting with me with these words. He said, Urs, I really love you. He said that, my colonel. You know I do. And your work is not even close to being good enough. His words made me shrink in my chair because he didn't only say that he loved me. I knew he did. He really knew me well by then. If he would have yelled at me, if he would have chewed me out, I would have just tuned him out. There's another high-ranking officer who just yells. But because I knew he cared, he really wanted me to do well. Dear Lord, that feedback, I took it to heart. And so us building trusting and meaningful relationships, which doesn't mean you have to be friends at all, but seeing your team members and whole human beings and letting them know that you see them then gives you license to be very tough on results with them. So that's that. I sort of flip it around like that. And I have another story in the book where I talk about my UN peacekeeping mission in the Middle East, and where I proactively went out and built relationships with key members in the mission, sort of really getting to know people on a more personal level up to the head of mission. And that then allowed me later on to actually get what I needed because I built these relationships up front without the business purpose. So being tender on people gives me license to be tough on results.
Whereas I really, really like how you've turned that around, and the tender on people, tough on results. That is that's a reframe by itself, is simply putting it in that order. Yes.
Right.
Yes, that's really well put. The other piece that I wanted to push on a little bit was transparency. And one thing that I really enjoyed that you included was that being transparent doesn't mean going in and sharing every detail of the fight you had in your home the day before. That's not what transparency is about. And that's not what vulnerability is about. Brene Brown will clarify that as well, right? And I know that has sometimes been a mistaken understanding in different circumstances that I have been. It's not about sharing or oversharing your personal life. But one thing that I wanted to push on just a little bit on transparency, because I've wrestled with this myself, is that it seems to me that while it's very important to keep people in the loop, and not just keep them in the loop, but be pretty transparent with what's going on with the business, with your own life. And there are times when you're pushing through a challenging circumstance that I think a leader has to put on a strong front, put on kind of a tough, and maybe overly positive sort of a spin to keep the team moving forward, because we don't quite know the results of this challenging thing that's happening over here yet. And I think of that a bit as translucency, because I think transparency is still the goal. But there are some times when it feels to me like as a leader, you might have to be translucent. How does that sit with you?
Yeah, I think, leadership is a thinking person's sport, right? So there's no right answer at all times. I would still put forward that the vast majority of leaders I know, I've seen, I read about, I write about, can do better in terms of being more transparent. And specifically, the first piece you mentioned, transparency around the business goals, the purpose. We as leaders constantly overestimate how well our people are informed. We think we said it a million times. And, I always joke, you got to say it 150 times, 7 different ways. And only if you have your team members paraphrase back to you what you mentioned, actually, what you said, have they really heard you. So I think it's almost impossible to over-communicate overall direction, where we're going. The best leaders I've worked for, and I try to do this myself, and I have a team, is there's one priority this month. We focus on one thing, not 7, 1, maybe 2. And everybody understands that, and you constantly talk about it. So then the second piece you're mentioning is, yes, I talk about the transparency around, my own vulnerability and where I suck at. And so I think you're absolutely right. Look, when everything is shifting and we're not quite sure, maybe we're being acquired, maybe not. But in the meantime, we need to put our head down and do the best work we can possibly do, no matter what's happening around us. That's probably not the best time to sort of, talk with a lot of vulnerability around what you're working on as a leader. might not be wrong, but that might not be the best time. So I agree with you. There's certainly times when we might have to put on a little bit of an act. Look, leadership, we're always on stage. The show never stops. Every single thing people observe, and you better watch how you show up when you think nobody's watching. So I think I sort of agree to some extent that maybe at times we need to sort of put on a bit more of a brave face than we might actually feel like. But if we do this over the long term, if we overdo it, it's going to bite you in the behind, because then it's, they're going to see you how you really are in the long run anyway. So, yeah.
Yes. No, that's well said. To that point, and to the idea that leadership is a thinking person's sport, and it definitely is. And going back to this idea of self-awareness,
Right.
the self-awareness, and you call it digging deep. I call it the commit phase of the grit triad. Is this owning your own story piece, and it's hard work, right? It's hard work that many of us don't have a chance to do well, have never given ourselves the opportunity to do well, have not taken the time to do well. When you talk about the importance of self-awareness and radical humility, can you talk a little bit about your own journey and how that has evolved for you in your understanding of your own, what self-awareness means for you and what self-awareness is for you, and then how leaders might be able to do that work to identify and address their blind spots to improve how it is that they lead?
Absolutely. So I think self-awareness, is in essence, seeing myself in line with how others see me, right? Doesn't mean that I agree, by the way, but seeing myself in line with how I'm being perceived. And look, I've certainly sort of gone through my own journey. I share in the book, I was fired from a job because I didn't have the self-awareness to shut my mouth. So, I'm somebody who finds it very difficult when I see something that doesn't feel quite right or doesn't seem right. I feel the need to speak the truth, and as a coach, that's often very beneficial to be able to sort of call out the elephant in the room. But it's not always helpful. And by the way, when I went back into the military to serve in my missions, I was keenly aware of my tendency to have difficulties to shut up. And so I was like, you got to be quiet. You're the oldest guy. Anyway. So really managing that. So there's plenty of things I, like all of us, had to learn over the years. So there's two simple things that I do myself and that I encourage leaders to do. Is two simple things. I think of it as an iterative process. It's introspection, in my case through journaling, meditation, and it's going out into the world and actually proactively asking for feedback from my teammates. And so go backwards and forwards. And so one of the things when people ask me, so what's one thing I can do, to be more humble? I go, ask your teammates at the end of every one-on-one, Shannon, what do you see me do well as your manager and what can I do better? And get into the habit, not once every 6 months, but every single time you ask that question. And again, I've done plenty of things wrong, but I did do this during my peacekeeping command. And I will never forget, I'm an old officer. I come back from the field. I start working on my laptop. I put my sidearm on my desk, and start working. And today you can't do this anymore. It's either on your body or it's locked up. And so I asked for feedback from one of my officers during our one-on-one. And he pointed it out. It's a small thing, but it really bugged him. Easy for me to fix. So you nip small things in the bud by asking for regular feedback. There's a whole separate conversation we can have about how to go about this, how to make sure people feel safe to speak up. And then introspection. I mean, you're the much better and keener writer than I am, Shannon, but I do keep a daily gratitude journal. What did I do well yesterday or the last 24 hours? What can I do better the next 24 hours? And what is the one and most important thing I want to focus on today? And so again, going backwards and forwards between out in the world, asking for feedback, and then introspection through journaling and meditation really helped me.
Well, thank you for sharing that. And you do a really wonderful job in your book about talking about going deeper into that process. So I would commend it to anybody who wants to take that a little bit further and know more about your journey there as well. Because we're talking about this introspection and this awareness, I wanted to get to something just a little bit more personal here towards the end. And you and I both had really strong relationships with fathers who passed a little bit too early on both accounts. And I just wanted you to share a little bit about what it was that your father taught you that made you who you are today.
My dad taught me a lot of things. The book is dedicated to him. He really was one of the best and most humble leaders I've ever known. So he taught me. So one thing which comes to mind immediately is my dad reassessed his career every 5 years. And then, unlike a lot of people, actually made changes if what he did sort of didn't feel quite well anymore and he wanted to do something different. For example, he stepped down from his very high-flying corporate C-level career and professor at university at age 51 and became a cheesemaker, learned to make cheese, and then served on missions as a UN election observer and other missions. And so he had humility to really assess where he's gone and where he's at, and then, unlike a lot of people, made those unconventional changes. And that has inspired not only me, but my two sisters as well to, lead what some would maybe call a less than conventional life and sort of try and really work hard to follow our own paths.
It's wonderful. Well, you have a wonderful tribute in your book to your father. And I remember seeing him actually once at in our neighborhood where both of us lived. And he was a very, very striking gentleman. So I know he had a outsized influence on your life and your family. So thank you for
Absolutely.
sharing.
Thank you.
Let's wrap this today with a little bit of coming around. And I think this will come around to encompass a lot of what it is you're doing in your book and what it is you're doing now in your life as you have done this assessment process. When you talk about and speak about and write about leadership, blending performance with humanity, right? And it's be a badass leader and a good human, which I love. How do you define purpose in leadership, and why is that important to humility?
How do I define, you mean purpose in general in leadership or for myself?
Purpose for yourself, and that could connect to a broader sense of purpose organizationally for another leader who is running a company or an organization.
So my purpose has definitely shifted over the years. And, if I'm really honest, which I am, is that it's been a process of shifting my purpose more from like external validation and, wanting to, achieve that position or have that. Frankly, I'm a bit embarrassed to say that, or have that title, even an academic title. Maybe even had that many coaching clients, and that many C-level coaching clients. And frankly, maybe earlier in my speaking career also, how many gigs and what are my fees, to truly now being deeply invested in the message and trying to make my own tiny, small little contribution towards shifting the conversation around what sort of leadership we need. And now impact is a buzzword and whatnot, but that's what I thrive on. I couldn't care less about, that's not true. I care much more about those kind notes from people via email or on LinkedIn who tell me how my book, my message really resonated with them and inspired them to, take their own steps. I mentioned, I think, to you, this one PhD student who told me my book inspired him. I'm sure it was a small part, but it was a part to pursue his own PhD in humble leadership. Like that's purpose to me. Another speech is great. I like it. It's fun. I love being on stage. But those messages from individuals who sort of see the value, like that really is meaningful. And that's what gives me purpose.
Yes. And purpose is this movement, this direction beyond the self, right? And sometimes it takes us a while to get to that place in our lives. And I feel like that's a helpful reminder for younger leaders that is an evolution oftentimes. I mean, you can pick something and it may be authentic, it may be slightly artificial, but you will move in that direction the more that you work towards those goals. So that's helpful. If you could tell 21-year-old Urs anything, knowing what you know now, what would that be?
So can I give a flip answer, Shannon?
Oh, sure.
Don't get married the first time.
All right, fair enough. Those of us who are only doing it once, it's a good idea.
Okay, so that is what. Sorry, that I'm like I can't help myself. So what else? So actually, one thing I would tell myself is to go abroad earlier. So now I've lived, abroad, meaning away from my home country, Switzerland, for more than half of my life. But I could tell my 21-year-old, like, go and study, your undergrad, your bachelor's, do it abroad, like learn more languages. So immerse yourself in more cultures. I know that's close to your heart. You and your family just spent a year in France, and like you're living this, Shannon, and at the stage now where it's more challenging than when we're younger. So the advice I give my younger self is, uproot earlier, explore more different languages, different cultures, immerse yourself, and not just as a tourist.
That's fantastic. And how, at this stage in your life, do you define success?
How do I define success? Well, I sort of talked a little bit about my purpose. I think success is, maybe go full circle. Success to me is, I do want to be a badass who does cool stuff, pulls off, if it's an Everesting in the ultra endurance world, maybe I can still do it with my aging body, or a good book, or a wonderful presentation to a client, like do some badass stuff, and be a good human being, being a good friend, being a good dad, being a good brother, a good son, a good family member, a good citizen, frankly. So that's what I define successful for me.
So would it be maybe being a badass leader and also a good human?
Yeah, that's right. I set that up well, did I not?
Well, I really like that. Thank you for sharing your stories and your wisdom and your insight. It really is a gift to the world, and there's no question that it's changing more lives than you'll ever know. So I hope that adds to that feeling of success where you've reached this point in your life.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, and I love the conversation. I appreciate you having me.
What a powerful conversation with my friend and colleague, Urs Koenig, someone I've always admired for his integrity, his commitment to service, and his ability to lead under pressure. If today's episode resonated with you, you'll want to pick up his new book, Radical Humility, filled with the same wisdom, real-world stories, and practical strategies that he shared here. I'm grateful to know Urs both personally and professionally, and I'm even more grateful that he's shared his hard-won lessons with all of us today. You can learn more about his work and order Radical Humility through the link in the show notes.